Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the board meeting of Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. We are recording this meeting and it will be put out into the public domain afterwards. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for viewing this. We always invite members of the public to attend. There's no one from the public here today. Can I just start with apologies for absence? Are there any apologies?
There are no. We are expecting Councillor Burton to join us shortly. Right,
John will be with us soon. Any declarations of interest other than the standing declarations we have from members of the planning committee? No declarations of interest. That then brings us on to agreement of the Part 1 minutes of the last board meeting on the 6th of April 2022. We have those in front of us, board. Are there any comments on those? People feel they a true and fair record of the meeting that took place? Great. So those are agreed. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Then we have our action log. I'm just having a look through items which are open. Is there anything you'd like to draw our attention to, James, in that?
No, I don't think there is in the scene.
I've got a couple of updates.
Go on in.
Yeah. So 0702, which was the meeting with Harbour Trust. You'll know there it says it was take place on the 12th of May. It did take place. Further discussions required there in terms of how our plan sits alongside the ambitions of the Harbour Trust, so that dialogue is ongoing. The next one down, 0101, this is the plan to mark the delivery of the 3,000 new homes. We're looking, so that work is underway. We're looking at a date in mid to late June for anything there. So just to reassure you all, that planning is underway. And just to say on the second to last one, which is 0108, goes back to September, we've just received in the last week or so the draft digital strategy, so that's, that will come to a future board meeting.
Excellent. Good. As its own paper. Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant. All right. Any comments on the action log board?
Can I just?
Yes.
On the event to mark the 3,000 new homes, which will be a significant milestone on the way. I know it's being planned, but what type of event have you got in mind?
So at the moment we've identified where we think the 3,000 home will be, the board order, which I predict that totally depending on which ones go over the line. We think we know where that's going to be. We talked to the developers and house builders for that scheme. So we envisage probably a couple of things. One is we'd like to celebrate that with the occupiers of that particular property in some way. We'd like to have something which is garden themed, so celebrating them, perhaps with some planting or something else. And then we also proposing to then hold a reception, a suitable venue close by to the house, and we've got something in mind, which we think will work well. And we'd like to invite partners and stakeholders that have been involved in the answers in so just again to help celebrate that quite significant milestone. So that's the current.
And it would be good if it's an exemplar of the environmental and standards that we're aspiring to as well.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, good. Thank you very much for that. Then that brings us on to our first board paper, Chief Executive's Part 1 Strategic Report.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to welcome Caroline, Caroline Doidge, who, as the paper said, started with us on the 3rd of May as interim communications manager. And as my paper says, Caroline having to bring with us long enough for it to be fair to me to ask her to produce a paper for the board in a couple of days' time. So, but there will be a standalone communications paper next time. In addition to the fairly short report that I've included here, just wanted also to mention the press release that we did allied to the launch of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, where we took that as an opportunity to again bring people's attention to the great work that's been done here and the progress that's being made on one of the largest regeneration projects in the country. So Caroline, having only been here a few days, did a great job bringing that together in a quick time. So that was noteworthy. And as we were just saying before the meeting started, there's some PR around at the moment regarding the consultation process that we've commenced on the restoration of Blue Lake. So those are other news items that have not that have happened subsequent to me actually producing my note.
All right. Thank you for that. Perhaps I can just thank Nick, who's a bit of a driving force for some of the PR. I'm sure he'll be doing more of that moving forward. But thank you, Nick, for doing that. Jeremy, I think you had a comment which I think we should discuss as part of the Blue Lake.
Sure. Yeah.
Development area.
I think one of the things we must remember, Chairman, is that this is a real community with real people, and when they see something about something we're doing, they have a right to look at it as we presented it and to make a judgment about it. And it seems to me that what we've done with the Blue Lake publicity, we need to be very careful about it, is that we've shown indicative views of things which do seem to not really reflect some of the aspirations we have for the community. And I understand in architectural terms and sometimes in design competitions you do get these kind of very grandiose pictures. But I think in terms of the Blue Lake consultation, there's one particular which looks over. I mean, now John's here, he might want to quickly catch up on the picture of Blue Lake itself. But in terms of one of the pictures which shows the view over Blue Lake towards Dartford, it shows a skyscape which I simply don't recognise as being related to our decision making or our planning or anything else. And I just think we need to be careful. We need to remember that this isn't a laboratory. People do live here, and they do have a right to see be reassured that we have a plan for how effectively modest some of these things will be. I mean, big but modest and on a human scale. And I think sometimes architects and designers, when they're publicising things, can get a little bit out of kilter. So I just wonder whether we should sort of, as a board, make clear our view that really representations we put out ought to be grounded in real plans.
Yeah, I think it's the point is well made. Welcome, John. Good to see you. I circulated the Kent newspaper piece myself, and the visuals weren't ideal because I'm sure that's not what it's going to look like. And actually, I thought you can't always get them to write what you want them to write. There was no mention of biodiversity in that game there as well. Obviously, the headline was like we're going to fill in the lake and build lots of houses. But if you dug into the article, it was more positive. But I think it's good that we've got more focus on comms, and I think we need to do more here.
Yep.
What can we do about maybe? Do we know they were going to go with that article?
I think they've been in touch.
They have been in touch with relation to the press release that went out with the Queen's Jubilee speech, but it just so happened, I think, naturally, our social presence as well was driving people towards providing feedback for Blue Lake, which is what we are seeking to get.
Yeah.
So they combined effectively two work streams that were a priority and combined into one.
On the use of imagery, picking up Jeremy's point, I have to say the imagery that we use should reflect what we believe to be within our plans and deliverable. I think with regard to Blue Lake itself, and I think the use of imagery from the landscape challenge that I remember discussing this at the time. But I mean, the plans that we are developing at Blue Lake are quite respectful of some of those landscape challenge ideas. So we've tried to, because we like the level of ambition that was being shown there. So the restoration project does have in its mind to deliver a restored Blue Lake, change Blue Lake with some of that, quite a lot of that ambition in mind. So I will check again for the imagery about heights of buildings and so on, and what's appeared in the background. But we'll, obviously what we use needs to be reflective of what we.
I think what I'm trying to do really is to protect the reputation of the board. Yeah. I think the board actually has very good and deep discussions to make sure that development here is on a human scale. It's not going to be popular with everyone because it's development, and I understand that, and there are infrastructure things which John and I try very hard to bring to the table and represent. So I think it's in our interest to protect our own reputation. And I understand it was a design challenge, I understand it was an architectural competition, and I understand all that, but we need to make clear that's when we release imagery, we need to make clear this was an architectural design competition and not a decision that is, or not a design that has yet been consulted upon or exposed to residents with their own view, because they're going to be living with this for decades. And it needs to be nice looking, it needs to be right, and it needs to be something they will support.
Well, hopefully we'll get lots of community engagement. They'll come back and say we don't like the look of that in that picture, which will be, which will be informative. John,
I think just picking up on your comment about the online article, I looked at it yesterday. There was 0. I looked at it 12:30 today. It's gone up to 21, and none of them positive. Yeah, and I think. If there is always a problem, you get the negative people reporting online, and nothing you do will ever be liked by many. Yeah. But the degree of negativity was surprising. There was a question of doubt behind it as well, which was the worrying bit as to, are we just like everybody else who put out these marvellous ideas, but we're not delivering on the key things like doctor's surgeries, and have we got the money to build it anyway? It's those sort of issues coming through. We need to improve how we promote ourselves, picking up Jeremy's point, because we are different to normal developers. In that we have support from government, we have the money coming in, we only build and propose to build what we know we can finance and build, and we then intend to go on to build it. And that's a completely different scenario. We're going to make sure that messaging is better understood. That's all you're building up. There's a lot of negativity to the EDC here, and it's already been felt out there.
Yeah, look, I think it's, there's currently a disconnect between the consultation work which is going on to our major projects and the final completion of our spend review. So, hopefully we'll be able to extinguish that disconnect in the course of the next few weeks when we settle our spend review. But the point is well made. We just need to be very careful about imagery. Yeah, understood. All right.
Just a couple of other quick things that remain on my paper. The board member recruitment is progressing well. We understand that the minister is ready to meet some of the candidates before the final selection process is made. So that's all progressing well. I think that is, so just at 7.4, towards the very last paragraph, in section 7.9 included an update on the latest primary school application process, because the board had discussed this previously. I think that information was helpful. At 7.5, so that I need to discuss further with KCC to understand whether those the number of school places at Cherry, which not matching the number, was as a result of the issue that we'd identified for. I'm still in the process of that discussion, so I can't give you any more information on that at the moment, but I will be pursuing that just to understand a bit more the detail of that.
All right, perhaps, thank you for that, Ian. Jump up on a couple of points. Yeah, look, I think absolutely the Housing Minister does meet with any of the appointable candidates as part of the recruitment process. That's great. Welcome that. It's good news. We're making good progress there. I was comforted on the school places that every child was offered a place that was less than 0.8 of a mile away from their home. think when we first discussed it, I certainly had the impression that we could be dealing with significantly greater distances. So you always want people to get their first school, but that is very, very difficult to achieve. 0.8 of a mile, and I think it's not a bad outcome, frankly. So thank you for looking into that. And if we can just minute our thanks to the Department and Secretary of State for our budget allocations during this spending review period, for our Reddell and our committed CDIL, that's our capital. And that was a very welcome hors d'oeuvre before the main course was settled. So some good news. Any other comments on Ian's update board? No? All right, Ian, thank you very much for that indeed. Then that brings us on to, that's just for noting, that then brings us on to the second paper, which is board effectiveness review results, which is in my name, this one. Look, I'm going to assume that people have reviewed this. Perhaps if I can just give my kind of overarching commentary on, I think, areas which, I think there's weakness where there needs to be improvement. I think we've had two things which have made life difficult apart from the pandemic for the Development Corporation this year. One is the delay in settlement of our spending review bid, which is not helpful for making timely progress, and I think that feeds through to an extent in this. Second point is that we are 3 non-executive directors down, so we've got a small sample size. We haven't been able to resource our subcommittees, panels to the degree that we want, and indeed our main board. There is a process that takes time, we're cognizant of that, but it has been to the disadvantage of the Development Corporation. I am kind of hopeful that both issues will get resolved in some proximity to one another by the middle of the year, which I think will hopefully improve this board effectiveness review when we need to do it. And I think there was also, it was pretty weak actually on the right amount of visibility and interaction with the sponsor department. Continual changes in who's responsible for things isn't that helpful. So this goes to the department, does it not?
Yes.
So perhaps we can highlight 18 to them. There's some very good people there, but I think it's important for the board to have a good relationship and also to have visibility with the team there. So the review is saying clearly can do better there. So let's make sure they understand what we're saying. I'm hopeful that we'll make progress on this. Are there any comments on this? No?
I was just going to say, there's one comment about the divided line between the exec and the non-exec and the non-execs. That's adequately defined. Could have more work done.
What's your view?
I suspect that it's been a tough old time with COVID. It's been a tough old time with only a few non-execs.
Yeah.
And it will be easier to define when we're fully loaded.
Yeah, I think we've had definite disadvantages in the last couple of months. Mindful of not extending the conversation too much, because one of the other comments was the length of the board meetings. I think we can do better, but I think we'll have the ingredients to do better in the following year. Okay, all right, that's for noting. Thank you very much for that. Then let's come on to the next paper, end of year performance report.
Yeah, thank you, and big thanks to James, who spends quite a lot of time at the end of the year putting together all the KPI information, some of which is quite hard to get out. Some of it is much easier, but thank you to James for that. Recall that. I think the context here, as well as those things that you just mentioned, Simon, the context of the disruption due to the pandemic. We have to remember as well that we only had a commitments only budget for this year, which meant that a fair bit of activity has not progressed at the pace that we would have liked. So some capital projects have progressed. And so in that context, I think the overall performance and the way that we have been tenacious in keeping moving on a number of fronts has, I think, been very good. In terms of addressing and hitting the targets, then we have achieved the vast majority of those KPI targets. If you look at the, I'll come on to the KPIs a little bit more in a minute, but in terms of the significant achievements set out at 2.3, there is a huge amount of work and time gone into what are quite sort of simple, short sentences. So the concept master plan for the Thames Way is a really complex project, different moving components. So having pulled that together and consulted and get that agreed. Likewise, the plan application for Grove Road, very complex. So across the board, including ensuring that planning applications and reserve matters are dealt with swiftly, very much aiming to achieve our quality and environmental standards. So having approved 883 homes over the last year, again, that's quite an achievement. We've also initiated new schemes and new work today, a new focus, particularly on employment and skills, which we had done very little of before, and the board have had updates from that regularly, including last time from Lara. So to have launched new schemes, apprenticeship schemes, and other employment schemes, I think from a standing start is, I think, been very satisfying for us, and is a big step forward. Obviously, we haven't achieved everything, but we set out in our business plan the notification of the Swanscombe Peninsula SSSI did delay things somewhat in terms of bringing Ebbsfleet Central plans forward. We've got those back on track now, and the application will be submitted next month. And as a result of the commitments only budget, then as bullet point 2 under 2.4 says, we've had to take a slightly sideways step on a number of schemes in terms of bringing them forward. Overall, there have been 533 homes completed. That was against our target of 525, so we've exceeded that, which is great. And I think as sub-elements of that, seeing the first custom build homes in the city start, that's been very satisfying as well. The board will remember we were struggling for quite a while to see where we were going to find that different typology. So it's really good to see those now coming forward. We feel we've got more to do in terms of other house typologies. I think particularly noticeable is the proportion of the new homes that are in the affordable homes category. So 254, so around 48% of the overall number, which overall, you'll remember that we've got a city-wide target of around 30%. We've slightly underperformed in previous years against that. This is helping to make up some of that earlier shortfall, so that's good news. And finally, on the KPIs, £138 million private sector investment has come into the Garden City recapitalised over the last 12 months. So again, that's I think a real sign of the confidence that there is in the private sector and continuing to build and develop here, and I think that's a growing level of confidence as well. So I think overall, given the circumstances, a very successful year again for the corporation.
Board. Any comments on this?
Just
John?
question we're going forward more than looking back. We've obviously got this coming cycle of expectation and build out. How are the developers looking at the rising building costs? Is that affecting their delivery? How do they think they deliver? Timeline of delivering? Are they slowing down, waiting to see if things improve, or are they just saying, well, we're just going to build it, so we're going to be okay?
It is affecting them all, John. Obviously, it's affecting the whole sector. Mark's probably the person who, in terms of the house builders, is probably having most dialogue with them around that. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, they're consistently raising issues around build costs. At the moment, that hasn't cascaded into forecasts and changes in the forecasts of the delivery. What we're trying to do is understand from them, where we can support the delivery on site by looking at, if, for example, brick costs are rising, but then how can we then look at where that cost can then be looked at across the wider site? Is there a way of sort of being able to support the rising costs somewhere to then be able to then save a little bit of cost elsewhere without reducing the whole quality of the scheme down? So yeah, we're consistently having those conversations. When we had in the last developers meeting, they were more concerned about interest rate changes rather than necessarily labour and build costs and things like that. It was the interest rate stuff that seemed to be the main concern.
Because of the impact on people's willingness to take out mortgages, or
yes,
about the impact on their own, or
their ability, people's ability and willingness to take out.
Perhaps Julie, in terms of the construction market and infrastructure delivery and build our own investments, building community buildings, etc. Again, we're seeing a lot of price pressure there. What the market is.
Yeah, it's I think the levels of cost increases are beyond what you would ever expect at the moment. So what we're doing is deploying different procurement strategies. And the key for us is, once we've got a price, is to get on site as quickly as possible and fix the prices with the suppliers. So that's what our main contractors are looking like. But it's also about looking at the materials that we're using. So that's a big determinant. I think we all know about steel price and what's driving that. So yeah, it's about looking at the types of materials, the types of lead-in, minimising steel where we can to do that. So and each project we bring forward, whereas before we would say this is the procurement strategy, and you'd normally expect us to go and tender it, and that's the price you get. What we're doing now is we're deploying different procurement strategies based on that specific project, and we will detail those to you to show how we can try and get that fixity to kind of come within the budget approval that we've got. But it's challenging. That's what I'll say at the moment. So
I know Neil wants to come in, but I think for me, John, whilst the market remains strong, and it does, I think the greatest risk is really downgrading or trying to downgrade the quality. So I think they're fairly confident they can sell what they build. The question is, will they try and reduce the quality in order to stay within the cost limit?
They moving from bricks to the big picture, and this may be more applicable when we set our key performance indicators rather than when we review them. I think there's a danger. One looks at the individual elements, so which is how you have to do it. But I think, can we also look at the overall contribution to creating a garden city? So taking as an example, Ebbsfleet Central, one of our core schemes, promoting. Even on that, there's a danger of looking at that on its own, rather than what does it do for the garden community as a whole. The benefit of it is taking advantage of the transport hub and so on, and also creating a centre for the community. And not only that, but looking at Alkerdon, when that develops, you've got the market centre there. And in my view, on all these indicators, we should be looking at it in terms of the overall garden community, rather than just the individual items. Because otherwise, what's the point of the corporation? It's not just a planning authority, it's not just a developer spending public money, it's trying to create a community. So it seems to me that perhaps this is for the KPIs, but we should always be saying, how is this contributing to building this community for people who are going to live here in the future? And as we get more and more people living here, how does it work for the people who live here?
I think that point's well made. I just wonder whether it would be possible that we are yet to set our business plan for current year because we're waiting for settlements and spend review. But I think if we can somehow capture within one of our KPIs, even if we could get close to mirroring some of the metrics which are being looked at in the levelling up regeneration bill, to see progress that we're making. I think that might be a good thing. Yeah. Very well made point by Neil.
I think the other thing I would say, and I would often use the phrase golden thread. I think we have a vision, which is that big picture stuff that we're trying to create this community, identification in terms of sector, and number of outcomes, we're trying to do that over a period of time, which is set in the corporate plan. You need to be able to see how each individual contributes. Exactly. You need to be able to tell that as a story. So it's making that connection back, so you don't just see it as a standalone. It's contributing to that.
And then you can see the progress as you move along and how each component part contributes to it.
Sorry, on this issue of community, I would agree we need to be very careful about that. And I understand the desire of the board to have what it refers to as the Ebbsfleet Garden City community. But we need to remember that community is going to be, when the board disappears, it will be in Dartford and Gratian.
Yeah.
And I'm picking up where in my area a very clear message that yes, they recognise a part of the EDC area and land and control. They're not necessarily feeling part of Gratian. So I'm part of the communication message there to deal with. It's been partly offset by what the EDC is doing and saying, no, you're part of us. But in being part of you've also got all the problems of all these grant charges, the service charges, and all the other problems that they really do not like. The fact they can't get problems with the road sorted out, parking sorted out, lights sorted out, all the things that local authority would normally get involved with, be it Kent or a borough level, is in effectively the responsibility of the EDC, because it's not us, it's you. But they're not feeling part of that community to get those problems resolved. So you
can understand that. So, you know, we're not responsible for highways work, are we? If there's potholes and if there's street lights not working.
It's not adopted, yes.
Well, no, it's
the
not
developers.
It's the management. It's the management companies or the developers.
You see, the trouble is they're not separating out the management companies and the developers from the EDC. So we've got the messaging it's all about communication. That messaging needs to be clarified. If the problem sits with the developer, it's the developer. If it's with the management company, we can work with you on that, dealing with the management company. Ultimately, once the EDC has the trust that's taken over the whole lot, they've got a nightmare to sort out all those arrangements, contracts and relationships, unless they start now trying to resolve them. Because there is a very big community engagement issue problem there that isn't being addressed.
But you're saying that problem is existing already?
Yes.
People are complaining already about the state of roads, which are the responsibility of the management company, the lighting of the roads. The management company is not responding. So that's happening, and there's evidence of that. Are we aware of that evidence?
Come to spring it. I'll knock on any door for you and
Yeah, I mean, I see lots of, they don't tend to come to us. They don't see us as associated with that problem. They associate it with the management company, essentially. So you do see lots of anxious comments about the management.
Is this
generally not?
Why is the management company falling down the job?
Some of it is perception, some of it is real. You've got.
But why is the management company falling down on the job in those cases where it is real? Is it because they they don't have enough money? Is it because they're ill-organised? Is it because they're not properly managed? What is the cause of the management company?
Two out of those three answers.
Which two?
Not probably organised and not doing the job. That's the feedback I'm getting. You go around talking to people, and the problem is, I appreciate it's the management company. The management companies will fold into the trust.
Well, they
The
won't.
trust is
No,
ours.
they
No, they won't.
A, no,
We
they
need to
won't.
solve it. They're not a
A, no,
community.
they won't necessarily. And B, the trust isn't us. I mean, I know sexually.
So these are management companies that are leave behinds from the house builders. So they're no nexus with us.
No, so they've been,
And they are house builders disposing of their long-term obligations.
and in the case of Wildcliff behind you, there is one, it's a fairly complicated set up in some instances, but you have one management company that covers the whole of Wildcliff, which has been established by Henry Cameron and the Masters Bar. But you do have in some instances then second order management companies on some of the parcels which are created by the development. But the management company for the whole one has been there for a long time. There are some service complaints about that, and you see lots of complaints when people get their bills from the management company. But generally, the level of service that they provide, the cleanliness of the streets, etc., is at a pretty good level. I don't see huge complaints about the service from
How do we monitor
there anyway.
resident concerns about management company?
Well, it would come through the resident satisfaction survey that we conduct.
It's quite filtered. Do we try and sit in, community Facebook groups and whatever?
Well,
we do that to monitor what's going on?
I sit in the residents' Facebook group here
As a resident?
as a resident,
Yeah.
and I do monitor it, and when I see issues come up, I send them off to the relevant party. I take a photocopy of it, and then it goes off to who I think is responsible.
So it is a long-term issue we've got here. There is going to be a patchwork of management companies of leave behinds from the house builders. And there is sort of a reputational issue for Garden City in that uncoordinated response to the long-term management of material parts of the Garden City. So somehow we need to think about how we can create some sort of umbrella.
I believe that this is not the right time to take advantage. Is it worth just saying that there have been an awful lot of studies about this since I took on trust? And we could discuss this later in the meeting. Perhaps we'll try and make time to do so. But an unendowed trust is extremely constrained in what risks it can take on. And the original ambition of somehow becoming the huge guerrilla-style management company running the whole thing is only feasible with a very different financial structure from anything that is foreseeable at the moment. So there's a lot of discussions that are going on about how we can try to structure this. There's no necessity to sort this out this week, this month, or even this year, because the assets that the trust will be asked to take on are extremely limited in the next 12 months. They're so limited, they're manageable.
But also, I think that you're not going to be asked to take on the house builder leave behinds or estate.
The original implementation plan was that it would start, and I think we sustainable.
But we don't have a contractual.
Yeah, I think we can come on to that. Let's discuss that in front. Obviously, as council leaders, you will have residents who will go to you to say this needs sorting, that needs sorting, whatever, and then you'll go back and explain that it's not adopted, a lot of responsibility. Sorry to hear that. You need to speak to your management company. I guess that's what's going on, isn't it?
It is, but the difference for me, I don't know about Jeremy, it's easy for me, but it's not easy in a way. If you're on County Council and a borough, you can take up the issue, one way or the other, you can deal with it.
Yeah.
When you're on one but not the other, you end up saying to the person complaining, well, it's not me, Gary, it's them. And that helps nobody. And all you do is kill the reputation of the person or body that's not doing it, as well as your own. And
Sure.
that is very negative.
Absolutely. I wonder whether, Ian, you can give some thought for how, obviously you're doing your part as a resident, but how the Development Corporation could be monitoring what is going on in resident Facebook groups. You obviously would need to get access to them by going in and saying, hi, I'm Ebbsfleet Development Corporation, and you as administrator allow me to join this Facebook group. But if they understood, people administering the accounts, if that's so we could try and understand, not to spy, but to try and understand if there were current issues that we could raise with management companies and or developers, then at least behind the scenes, we don't make it's clear that we're not responsible for this, but we do want to see things running properly. Can you give some thoughts to
Absolutely.
Yeah?
You're trying to behind an
see what
image
there'll be recurring issues like that, you know.
trying to behind an image of a garden city that's great, lovely, welcoming, green grass, lovely trees, great communities. Reality will be you'll leave a community of patchwork quilt, or some good, some bad, some indifferent, and constantly moving as to which of those it is, and general unhappiness. And that will be the after effects of the garden city.
Look, and there
Is
could
that
be,
what we want? If it is, then let's be clear about it.
look, there's a big development in my ex-ward in the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead where it's being administered by a management company, terrible job, but then this set up a residence management company, now it's much better. So it could be just, there needs to be an improvement in the governance arrangements around some of these developments as they kind of settle down.
Could I just, I'm going to come in anyway about something, but on that last point, there are some immutable laws of the modern economy, which is that you can't avoid death and taxes. There should be no taxation without representation. And the issue of management companies' right to coach horses through that, because you are effectively, I mean, let's be honest what this is. This is developers knowing that there is no longer a public immediate takeover of their, or adoption of their building. They don't want to be doing the work of a local authority, so they put in place a pseudo-local authority called a management company. And that has a whole range of big issues, not least the largest resentment, of course, is that of double and triple taxation, which is that people are paying parish councils in some cases, they're paying borough councils, and they're paying management fees, and they don't really understand, because there isn't much difference, frankly, about why they're paying twice. Now, that's a big issue. One of the things we might do as a highly visible forum here as a board is we might actually look at encouraging the most significant bit of reform that's needed in legislation in terms of regeneration, and that is to sort that out. There must be a right for residents simply to be able to say, we don't want to live like this, we want to do this instead. There has to be a way of doing that, and I'm afraid that the law makes it very complicated at the moment, and the contracts make it complicated. So, but that's a big issue. But I think perhaps it is an idea for a workshop. I mean, might be one day, as Daniel has said, it might be an idea of taking it off the line and having a workshop about it, just to reassure the people of the area that actually we're interested in their welfare. Could I just quickly come on to the other issue I was going to raise?
Can I just touch up on that one? Daniel, is this somewhere that I'm trying to foist it on you, that as the process of the levelling up and regeneration bill goes, is whether or not it be possible to make some form of amendment to it to try and deal with this issue?
Some will draft it.
Yeah.
See, some management companies are really good.
What you want,
but they're profit driven.
So what you want is parallel to the right to management situation that exists in lots of backlogs, where by virtue of the statute, any pre-existing contractual arrangement can be nullified. It doesn't matter what the contract says. If a sufficient number of residents vote to take over management of their own block flats, then any pre-existing contractual arrangements simply cease to exist. And you want something parallel to that in the management of estates. so that residents then have a formal structure by which they can express their vote. They create a company, which can be called a right to manage company, because that's what we have in this thing. And it has slightly different obligations from a normal company. It has to produce a 10-year maintenance plan, things like that. Something you'll want to get agreed about. But pre-existing contractual commitments to the existing manager, things like that, just are nullified. And then they go and appoint whoever it is bids for the work of managing it for them. And they can change that person, that company when they choose. And there could be a role, a realistic role, potentially, for the trust as an organisation that bids for that work in competition with others, and might be quite successful on price and on quality of delivery. I don't know, I have to show that. That's very different from the original conception of the trust becoming the manager. But if somebody was willing to help me draft it, I'd be happy to do that.
Can we? Yeah. Okay. So
Practically,
yeah.
I mean, that's 10% chance of every 5 that actually have an impact, whereas actually talking to the house builders and
I thought that would be needed to be taken up and approved by the government.
then I will buy you lunch. And actually getting talking to the house builders, actually showing them the comparison between their areas and their leave behinds, and actually saying we have to change this because this patchwork is unsustainable and will be reputational for you, and actually driving them towards quality providers and getting more of an overarching strategy.
I'll buy you lunch.
That is the strategy.
The reason you can't do that is because, of course, you are then. I mean, the answer to this is actually to withdraw love and support from the developers in your area if they do not put in place proper management regimes. But then you are counterintuitive to your.
You also have the fundamental.
I know, but I mean,
you also have the fundamental problem that good management does cost some money, and if you really want to have your plants replanted every 6 months, or whatever is your floor borders and whatever, then there will be a higher service charge. And so I'm not saying that they're efficient in everything they do, a lot of money is wasted. But nonetheless, there is some correlation between the quality of the maintenance and the management and the service charge.
All right, can I make my second point? It's an entirely separate one, and perhaps another day. Yeah. This is a big subject. I mean, it's interesting to raise it though, because it's one that crops up much more in our world than in yours, if I'm honest, and it crops up all the time with residents who are really upset about the double taxation, and they immediately come to us and say, well, why are we paying for this? And the answer is, well, you're not actually. You're paying for a general societal bill which we deliver things for. But the point I was going to make was a few years ago on cost of living and other issues affecting the market. A few years ago, Dartford dipped its toes rather casually, actually, and well, bravely looking back, into a financial instrument to enable people to buy houses. I think that at one point we were underwriting the deposits in exchange for a share of the homes at the bridge development. And I forgot how successful it was until very recently, when in the course of 3 days, I met 4 families, just entirely coincidentally, who said, without this, we would not be able to buy our homes. So I wonder whether, given all the other things we've got to do and all the time we have available to us to do it, I was wondering whether we might look at whether there is at least an opportunity for us to consider some financial instrument or financial involvement with a financial authority that actually does provide that comfort and surety. Because it's all based upon rising land value, and an individual mortgage application may fail for a whole range of reasons, but fundamentally, if the value is maintained in the property and we are underwriting part of it and we're confident about rising land value, that's how the Dartford scheme works, as I remember it. It actually meant that the mortgage providers were falling over themselves to buy our bulk of mortgage business that we were effectively channeling their way. And I don't know it works. It will work today. Perhaps there's a very special reason why it worked. Perhaps there was government support. I can't even remember. But I do know it works. I was wondering whether we ought to at least be looking at something like that to see whether we can, as a corporation, not just focus on developers and the environment, but sometimes focus on the buyer and see whether there's a role for us there too.
May I make one comment?
Yes, is it on that?
It won't be. No, but it's on the general topic.
Yeah.
Not a response to it. Right.
Go on, please do, Daniel. Please do.
In the old days, he says, if you bought a house, you had a solicitor. The solicitor would tell you what it was you were taking on. That would include the fact that you had service charges as source, you had ground rent, which looked cheap but was going to increase, and whatever else like that. Nowadays, a lot of people use conveyancers who simply do the mechanics and don't give advice. In my view, foolish. You could use a conveyancer for a disposal of a house. But a lot of people do because it's so much cheaper. And so a lot of people are coming in really not, it's all very well saying, didn't you read your lease? The answer didn't read the lease and nobody read it for them. Nobody properly advised them on it. So I think we have a communications job to do in obliging somehow the house builders to make it abundantly clear to people who are coming in what obligations they are taking on in buying property in the Garden City of their own volition by signing their own documents, not obligations being imposed on those they're accepting. Because an awful lot of people, we had 15,000 people, 15,000 households saying, we never knew. And there's some justice in that, because it's unreasonable to expect them to find out. So somebody has to tell you, and I don't know what it is we're doing to say to the house builders, to find out what house builders are doing and trying to make sure it works, or whether we have a supplemental role when we advertise the Garden City on our website, and when we send welcome packs, which I imagine we might start.
But that's too late. That's too late. Yeah, you get.
Yeah, but that's too late. But at least you know. But at some point, somebody has to do this job and explaining to people what they're taking on.
Okay.
There is a code of practice that you can agree with. Ebbsfleet code of practice, I guess.
All right, perhaps, I think we've had a good debate here. I think maybe some actions here. Yeah, I do think it would be useful in some way that we can formalise and also be in a KPI for the next business plan. Resident satisfaction with the management of the estates that they live in here. That makes us to an extent. But this is going to impact the Garden City.
Yeah.
These areas are not looked after, so
You can ask the question with
we can go to the house builders.
a degree of.
So I think there's that. There's monitoring, and it should be a KPI. That's the speed of resolution of issues in the communities that they live in. I think it's an issue for the local authorities, but it is an issue for us. We can't avoid it. So, to something else. We're responsible for it, but we certainly have the levers to influence people's behaviour. So that's that. Some support for Daniel in his powerful amendment to the levelling up and regeneration bill. The Moynihan amendment. So there's that one.
Well, I think it's starting in Commons, and I don't know, we need to find out where it's starting. It might be a good idea to get an MP.
Well, one of our local MPs then.
Yeah, but then I pick it up. It would go nowhere in the Commons.
All right.
But then I can pick it up, you see, and so you feed off the reaction from the other, you say this is brought up to Commons.
All right. Perhaps one of our local MPs.
I'm happily
both supporters. Yeah.
Adam or someone to,
yeah.
to a bit of drafting, a bit of.
I don't know if we could find out a little bit of meat on the bone about what Jeremy was talking about.
Well, I'll introduce our team to you and see whether.
Yeah, let's have a look at it. We're not looking to wade into buy-side support.
Can we parked Garden City Trust and its role. The danger if and this may be a good idea generally, there's a danger that we rush off on that sideline, which is encouraging residents to be able to take over their individual management companies. Whereas I think we should be looking back at the vision for the trust to be, in effect, a management company for the Garden City. And I don't want to lose that before by rushing down the other avenue.
Which, and the short-term basis of that would be actually the trust to partner with an existing management company, so you could start the process going and start to create a exemplar process.
That point's well made. We will discuss that.
We need a longer session.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
KPIs, green factors of biodiversity, we need to start.
Yeah.
But the reason we need to be in the space, Simon, is because residents are right about this.
Yeah, look,
It's a bad deal for them.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
that's the green light for us to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely, and we are, Garden City, where there are a significant number of diverse management responsibilities being knitted together. So it's going to be quite acute here. So I think we do need to focus on it. Yeah, that's good. Let's get our focus to a KPI. Generally, let's kind of just double back. On the business plan, I think it's been a strong performance in a year with pandemic headwinds, but I think there's been very strong performance from the Development Corporation. When we come to our housing numbers, the next KPI, I'm sure we're all aware that Help to Buy is going to be coming to an end. So, the extent to which that can have an impact on delivery here, let's make sure we understand that issue locally. But otherwise, I think the paper is for noting. I think we've had a good discussion. Thank you. Great. Kevin, Ebbsfleet Living, May 2022. What's been going on?
Thank you, Chair. We did have a meeting of the Community Board last month looking at our emerging ideas and concepts for the Health and Wellbeing Hub, which had really great attendance. And this was the latest in this sort of series of events we've been having with public and stakeholders about the vision for health, delivery and intergenerational housing in the Garden City, which will hopefully manifest itself in a proposal at Ebbsfleet Central. And the output of this will be sort of developed into a proposal which will come to board in the autumn. But really great interest from the population. Obviously, health is something very, very important to everyone. But our ambition really for the Health and Wellbeing Hub is sort of a world-class one that really has a enthusiasm from people locally. So again, watch this space for this developing over the next few months. In terms of activities, obviously April was Easter, and the sunshine came out, so we had lots of activities and events in the Garden City, which was great to see. Our Easter egg trail, which used the fast track lane, which is currently unused, going through Wycliffe, had over 200 kids and 150 parents on one day at that event, which was tremendous, and that was led very much by the Sunday Active group and local residents themselves, so really great to see that amount of interest. So it really shows that any time we have an opportunity for events in the Garden City, that the community come out in force and really, really benefit from that as well. And not only were they trying to find Easter eggs, but we had 96 people doing entries of designing and decorating Easter eggs as well. So I think any event we have really seems to get great output from the community, which is great. I put a feature on this month's newsletter. Just want to pick up on our Better Points app, which is part of our Get Active in Ebbsfleet initiative, which started off as part of our Healthy Newtown concept, and we've continued now into the 5th year with this. We have over 2,200 active users of the Better Points app, which rewards residents for keeping active. Our feedback from them this year is that actually it's been most used by the least active people. So it's something that's been really, really good for people who generally aren't active to try and get involved in activities and get involved through different events. And sometimes that's then led on to them being part of the Couch to 5K and doing marathons and other things as well. So it's really been a great tool. Just to pick up some of the highlights of it, we've had over 800,000 people doing activities over the 4 years that we've been running it to date. So we'll be running towards 1 million this year. So that's either walking, cycling or running. That saved over 40 million calories. And again, knowing locally that childhood obesity generally and diabetes is one of the key issues. and one of the real focus areas of levelling up in terms of health and well-being. This tool has been really, really exceptionally useful for us to really have a conduit to community, and it's something they are picking up. And taking our example, a number of other places nationally have picked up Better Points up and are trying to follow it in new schemes as well. So it's really been a great success story for us. And something that we're not just using to help people get active, but using it to learn what people would like to see in the Garden City, how we design the parks in the future, what things people like to get involved in. So it's a really good tool for us to use. So I really just wanted to sort of highlight some of the success of that over the last 4 years, and we move into our 5th year. A couple of other points to pick up are This Must Be the Place programme, which is the youth programme for getting young people involved in designing the future Garden City. Led a week-long programme during the Easter break, which brought schools, not just from Ebbsfleet Academy, but from secondary schools across Northfleet and Dartford to get involved in that. And again, really, really great input from that. That's all been funded by the Arts Council and delivered by Cement Fields in partnership with ourselves, and all of our staff actually got involved in that as well, and sort of showing people what could go forward. And then to our final point for me is our employment skills programme. Again, great leaps forward. Last month in so far as our work readiness programme launched for the first time, with 17 people getting involved in that, all of whom got a CSCS card. Again, the first of our Building Future Skills programme, again working with secondary schools across the area, had over 31 people involved in that programme over the last month as well. So great to see opportunities for local people accessing future jobs coming through that.
Did they pass the exam for the CSCS?
Sorry?
Did they pass the exam, all of them? The CSCS?
17 of the people passed the exam.
17 out
of the programme. Some kind of fell out over the period. I think it was about 30 to start with, but about 17 that finished it.
I said all of them did. All the ones who made it to the end.
Yeah.
All the ones who passed it did. I got 100%.
Did you?
It wasn't huge either. Even my highly qualified, technically qualified assistant, so I took the same time, took the exam at the same time, so you qualified electricians.
Right.
Got 99%.
It's a shame you wasted all those talents.
I was impressed. I want to share.
Good.
So glad the idea that they all got it, they just fell on a course, they got it.
Right, you hit a nerve there.
No, I think that's got.
You're not coming in on that side,
I think it's. No, I am on that. I think it's got fair. I'll tell you why. I mean, when you set up these things, I mean, of course there'll be a dropout. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a failed program, or that you haven't got everybody. No, hang on. Or that you haven't got everybody across the line. I think the issue. No, it's a sensitive. With all your skills, you need to. Well, the issue I think for us is that we've got to keep on celebrating all this, and I think he's actually right to say that all the people who entered into the final stage of it got through. I mean, I think that's the point of the crunch point when you've done all the work, education, all the skills, delivery. Then there is a point of examination. There's a point of testing. And I think that's the point we're making. By the time you got to that point, they were all very equipped to go through. And even those, frankly, that fell by the wayside, one can only hope they picked up great skills and other things along the way. And they might even, some of them might be thinking, well, I wasted the opportunity, I won't waste it next time. So I think there's work to be done. On the general issue of communication or community, I want to highlight the board because I mean, this isn't an unalloyed good story, because I think what we've got to do is always be challenging ourselves. And I think one of the things we've got to address as the board is the extent to which we are delivering sustainability inside the community board, the community deliveries, because it's always been my concern with varying degrees of aggression. I put this at board meetings as to whether or not, simply buying in consultants and people and to help things is actually building community, or whether it's what it's doing is simply giving a perception of it. I think that's been resolved, and I think we are now delivering genuine community work, and I think the community is taking it on. But I do think, if I'm going to be self-challenging to my own interest in this, we need to set a measure about how we withdraw ourselves from this and how we measure the success of that community activity in the form of local leadership. Because I've always made the point, although this is a very high-profile place and a very high-profile bit of business, and a very high-profile bit of property development, high-profile bit of regeneration, it is fundamentally no bigger than many of our villages that John and I deal with. And so it is just a village. And so what we need to do is to find those village leaders somehow to really take it on. And I think we need to think about that as one of our targets going forward, to make sure that eventually it isn't councillors like John and I turning up at these meetings and leaving the chair. We actually need to be withdrawing and leaving it so the people who live here, who know and love the place better. And I think that's one of the targets we've been missing. I was hoping a year and a half, 2 years in, we might be able to do that. Clearly COVID got in the way. But I think it's important to make the point to the board that from this point on, I think one of our objectives at the community board is going to have to be that relentless attempt to find people to join us. And I might be going back to you and with Kevin's assistance to say the community board needs to get a bit larger, it needs to expand a little, take a few more risks with people, because I think at the end of the day it'd be a dreadful failure if we are still on it at the end. In the last quartile of our life here as a board, we should be out of it and they should be running ourselves and making their own decisions.
Way to go for us to be out of it, but perhaps again in our KPIs we can think about the community capacity.
To be honest, it's growing.
That's good, yes, so much good work to do.
We once had 35, you know, we managed to get them down to 12. I feel we're heading back
Picked
to
up
35.
two.
So
Picked up two, community capacity.
I chaired a graduate recruitment charity for BAME graduates who, of course, were getting degrees in which are called London's tertiary colleges and not getting jobs. And yet they were doing law degrees and getting law, they weren't getting quite well. And we put together a network whereby we were getting on average 25 people through jobs because we got kite marked by specialist recruitment firms, etc. But it was all about training them for the job into them, getting them ready for work. And that was great. But when we went into the schools and into the educational establishments and gave master classes with people talking about how they got into work, and we were suddenly addressing 3,000 people a year, getting them ready for work. So actually, if we think about what we should be doing here for that sustainability, when we started Wembley, we set up a one-stop shop for Brent and ourselves to get people into work. So when will we be doing that process? Because I think that it can't be too far off when we have that process embedded in the community. And that's when we really start to create the sustainability. But when you get the community involvement and you get people willing to go into the schools and into the further education and to actually talk about how they got their jobs and people listening to their interesting stories, then you actually get far greater dynamic and impact far quicker. And your KPIs are more easily achieved.
All right. We'll be thinking about that in relation to the KPI and capture community capacity. Indeed. All right, good. Kevin, as always, thank you for all the excellent work that's going on in the community. That paper is for noting. That then brings us on to the next one, Mark, Planning and Housing Delivery Report.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Yes, so the usual update from me. So Planning Committee did meet in April, so I reported last time about the deferred item for Redrow Alfred South. So that was approved at the April meeting. So Redrow responded very well to the deferral and sort of developed the design landscaping areas where the committee were concerned, and that was very helpful. We are planning some work with the committee, hopefully to do a site visit and to have a development presentation on Ebbsfleet Central during June in advance of the submission for that, which is planned later in the month. The usual programme is included in 2.3. In terms of the development sites, I've listed out a few of the largest sites that we're expecting to work on under 3.2. In the last few days, we have had the first phase of Alcadon South Market Centre, Alcadon Market Centre coming. There's been some press released from the developers there announcing that Morrison's is the delivery sort of partner, the food store occupier for Alcadon Market Centre. So that has now been submitted and we'll be consulting shortly. We've just sent out quite a lot of consultation around Northfleet on the second phase of Harbour Village. Reported previously just around the heritage issues around Northfleet. We have today, John, received the application for the interpretation panel for the benefit public art, so that is overdue, but we'll be engaging with heritage groups on that over the next week or so. and the areas around the scheduling around North and West, and they expanded the potential boundary for the scheduling of the assets that they found there, the kilns and the tunnels, and we're expecting a decision from Historic England by the end of the week on that. A few smaller updates just for section 4. I did get an email from Savills last night just to inform me that I should be my direct contact in terms of London Resort moving forward is someone actually in the London Resort organisation rather than Savills. So I assume that therefore Savills are no longer working on the project. There's a quick update there in terms of the Dartford plan. I've obviously been speaking to Jeremy's officers around that, and we had a very good and helpful session with Frame Projects in relation to the design forum. I've already discussed with Ian about getting involved in the selection process for those forum members. Housing stats as usual in terms of number 5, section 5. There is a slight error, I'm afraid, on the dashboard. The affordable housing tally should read 910. Which would then bring our overall percentage to 30.5. That then does tally with the long list of data I've given you in Annex C. I did speak to the developers about Help to Buy, as referenced in 5.4. They were very relaxed about changes to Help to Buy. Didn't really feel as it was a particularly big issue locally, so I don't think that we should be too worried about that. And then Annex C covers the overall type and tenure information as previously requested. And I think previously I brought that forward in 2 papers last year, and sort of moving forward, our plans to provide the information as presented probably every 6 months. But yeah, happy to take questions as usual.
Good, John.
Just going back, thank you very much for the report you sent through on the tunnels and kilns. It was interesting. I know you're sending to Kent for their view on it as to their opinion before you make a final view. Have you had that comment back? Because I was a bit concerned the report seemed to basically almost say, well, collapse the tunnels and the kilns and fill them all in and dig over and build over it and ignore them. There's no way we could have built around them or marked them out, put piling either side of the. Why do you know where the tracks were?
Yeah, various things are being explored about the level of retention versus removal. I think for me, a lot of it does come down to, is it given any designation? Because obviously, if the whole thing is, then the whole thing needs to stay. If a section of it is, then that's the important bit. If none of it is, then it's a discussion with Bellway to understand which sections can be retained, whether piling can be moved, whether for example one of the kilns ends up in someone's back garden, it's just on the ground. I know that Bellway are concerned about retaining a kiln if there's a tunnel underneath, because then there's sort of structural issues in terms of some of their buildings. But yeah, I know there was actually supposed to be a meeting taking place this afternoon. I think it starts at 3 o'clock. So yeah, all of those conversations are continuing, and yeah, we are speaking to KCC and Historic England as being the experts around that.
How long will the designation take? Because
we're supposed to get a decision by the end of the week, or an initial decision by Historic England by the end of the week. Yeah, and then I think the actual final report's supposed to flash on. I can obviously let you know when that comes through.
Yes.
On completions this year so far, 83. So that's from the beginning of April until when? Is that just April?
It's April and whenever Claire wrote the report, so it's probably into the first week of May. I think that previously we were quite tight in terms of month on month. Yeah. Now we change it to a cycle to every 6 weeks. We obviously provide as up-to-date figures as we can when we write the full papers, which would have been done a couple of weeks ago.
83 is good, whether it's just for April or April plus a bit. So it's a good start to the year, which is encouraging, but a completely different point. Can we at some stage on planning, and I say at some stage, get a report on whether we should be doing anything in response to the planning and regeneration bill? I mean, we know it's all going to be amended because Daniel's going to be so persuasive that we don't need to leap to it.
It's,
regeneration and levelling up.
Yes.
The planning.
No, so levelling up and regeneration.
Okay,
So the planning.
Wash your mouth out.
I know.
No,
sorry.
Planning?
Not called planning, so it's called the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, but this is the planning paper, and there are some quite significant changes proposed in that legislation to planning decision making. But as far as we're concerned, as a development corporation, there's going to be a power for development corporations to be plan making as well as decision making authorities. That's something, it's not something that I'm suggesting we should do, and I don't think it's probably appropriate for us at all, and it would mean far too much extra work, and Creation and Dartford are doing a good job anyway, so we don't need it. But I think that's the type of thing that we should just at least think about. We probably need to think about it later when the bill's made more progress, but can I just put it down as a marker as something we need to look at?
In general, it is worth having paper that next time in school, but just picking out key things from the bill that are relevant.
Yeah, well, I've already done a list in case I was asked today, so I can easily, find what they're doing.
Well, I think the useful to have it as a paper.
Yes, I think it's a paper.
In terms of the local plan point, yeah, certainly when I started here, I was of the opinion that I thought a local plan was helpful. I think that's gone on. I'm sort of the opposite view. I know how difficult it is to get a local plan through. There's obviously an awful lot to review on the ground. The strategic approach that we're, just the original vision is articulating existing plans. So yeah, I don't think there's particularly for us.
I think it's probably something we should just think about, so that we thought about it, and we'll have to think also when we do that about these new supplementary plans, which is a new form of supplementary planning document that's going to have to go through a more formal process, but it will become part of the development plan. And how, if we wanted to, we could use those in cooperation with, because they would have to do it, the local authorities.
Yeah.
So those are just things that, all I'm raising, that we need to think about it. And could we have a paper at some stage?
Yeah, that's right. But there's obviously other areas that are around about planning fees, enforcement, national DM policies, various things that are specifically related to us. And then there's other things which I can easily put together.
The street bills.
Yes, there is street bills.
Yes.
Yes. I'll get it next time.
All right, so we'll have a paper on that next time. Not within this paper, that'd be great. Good. Yes, Nick.
So a couple of questions which I didn't get to ask in relation to the year end bit. But I think the first thing I want to talk to you about, was pleased to see you chosen frame as your design forum. Was that a tough choice? Was it?
Went through a procurement process. Yes, just quality and price as usual. And they will do. It
was a good chair, so that's good news. I'm going to be fascinated to learn about the brief that you're going to be giving the design forum for the sort of quality review to embed the garden philosophies and the green issues, so that those all come out of the design plans to fundamentally sign up to our ethos. I think that could be quite an influential process. And then my normal bugbear about it's great news we've got 48% of our affordable homes, but I suspect 90% of those were shared ownership, were they last year? Is there anywhere where we know where the affordable rent homes are actually being built on the Golden City at the moment? I think
yes, absolutely. Yes, yeah. I mean, I think from my perspective,
offline, you can just tell me about it. So I can asking the question.
I think from my perspective, what I think that the value is of looking at the consented housing pathway is that generally we're finding few changes taking place between the planning commission stage and the implementation stage. So if you look at planning commission, we are now 5,513. Therefore, it gives a fuller picture than just looking year on year. And yeah, in terms of then there's some information there. I mean, at the consented ones, you're 1,230 shared ownership versus 441 affordable rents. So there is obviously less affordable rent coming forward. But they are absolutely big.
The split of the 48%.
Yes, I saw that. I've been with the split of the 48%. So going back again to the year end, and I know you're still dealing with historical planning concerns, you can't really influence this process. But if someone said to me that we were delivering specialist housing, I didn't include in specialist housing what I know as lifetime homes, kitted out for those who are in wheelchairs. That's in half mile in London, but every single block of flats has to have 10%. But I'm wondering whether we're thinking about what the specialist homes are that we should be promoting in the Garden City for partially sighted, those with Alzheimer's, those who have levels of mental impairment. It's a really important aspect, I think, for what we're doing in creating a community here. And I'm sure it will assist Gravesham and Dartford dealing with their issues in that regard. And then finally, can you tell me a bit more about the custom build homes? Because I think in various regeneration areas where you have this opportunity for people to custom build, there's some really magnificent design opportunities. So I'd be interested to understand how the Garden City is, the Development Corporation is aiming to influence that sort of level of creativity, whether we have defined areas, what the rules are that we could be promoting. But maybe you and I can take that offline.
Yeah, happy to come back on
please do.
I mean, just in terms of the numbers, we are pushing N42 levels, which is essentially the new version of lifetime homes, as much as we can across the board. So we don't use that as a guide in terms of specialist or sort of thinking of things in terms of particularly sort of special products in a way. We have been tracking wheelchair units at N43. We are getting some of those across various different sites. Unfortunately, none secured across Eastern Corridor, but there is a limit in terms of what can we achieve there. Kevin's actually done an awful lot of work over the years with sort of Kent County Council and other health providers to understand what sort of the health offer looks like in terms of different housing products. To cover on that.
Yeah, I mean, as part of the Health Wellbeing Hub, we're looking at the minute, we're looking at intergenerational housing with it. So the stakeholder groups we've been looking at have been looking specifically at what we need for home variation in specialist housing, ranging from variations in extra care and low-level support to very high-level support. So as is emerging in the Health Wellbeing Hub proposal, there is sort of aspirational, what we call right-sizing housing products, right through to kind of very specialist kind of transitional housing products that are emerging, and that's based on need that's been identified from our working with the local authorities. We also commissioned Housing Lynn, who are the kind of national expert in this area, to look at a demand and need analysis for specialist housing locally, and they've identified what the product need is, and a lot of that did identify this kind of what we call happy stroke right-sizing products or aspirational housing. So we know there is a need and demand. We have an ageing well at Ebbsfleet group that's chaired by Anna Tidmarsh, who used to be head of adult social care for Kent, and brings together the local authorities. So we're working with them to try and identify opportunities to deliver. So some on our land, some on GBC land, some on DVC land, some that CCG might own or KCC might own. So we are behind the curve inside getting some delivered, but we certainly have identified the need, the ambition, what we're trying to achieve. We don't need to find the opportunities to deliver them on specific sites. But EDC is certainly considering them on a number of our own sites at the minute.
And in terms of custom build, I can certainly share details of the planning application with you. I can pop it over. But yeah, I mean, I'm sort of quite excited about the custom build. The conversation we have with planning committees is almost you don't quite know what you're approving, because obviously depending upon all the different choices you make the actual final sort of form of everything could be different. So yes, so they have different options around sustainability levels, parking numbers, the materials that's used outside the properties. I mean, I think that when you look at customisation, I'm sure that there are some schemes that probably allow greater levels of customisation, but we were really trying to encourage the developers and give them quite a lot of free rein about allowing people to be having variety. What we haven't had yet, interesting.
Potentially quite interesting PR.
Yeah, it's consistently flagged as being a really positive scheme. I think that what we haven't had yet is actually any feedback as to what people's choices are, which will be really interesting as some of those sales go through to actually understand what are people selecting and then what that final version be. But I consider both things.
All right, John.
Sorry, it might be the language you use, but can you clarify what you meant by the planning committee don't know what they're permitting?
Sorry, it's just that they don't know the final form of what the street's in. So they have an envelope of what they know what the choices will be. So they would look at different materials, different roof forms, different actual sort of envelopes. But then depending upon how each person comes to the developer, to actually then purchase a collection of choices. That will then obviously then change the way in which that street scene works. That's just how custom build schemes work. But obviously, in a way, all of the different scenarios have obviously been assessed to make sure that they are acceptable in planning terms.
So effectively, it's not someone buying their own piece of land, going out to an architect and designing their building. They can buy a one-day or a.
Well, it's the hubcaps. It's location.
It's not self-built, it's custom.
It's the location of the kitchen in relation to the dimensions of the sitting room.
But there are changes to the outside as well, which is something that
So the answer to John's question is, the planning committee know the parameters
The
of
parameters.
that committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just had this
We
vision
have-
of you not knowing when you permitted.
That's fine.
All right, it's a good clarification, John.
You could have a wonderful house that came. Wouldn't that be a wonderful light, or a planned light?
Welcome to local government. It's really quite good.
All right, good. It's a good paper, Mark. Thank you very much. I see that as and when we move forward our business planning year, we're thinking at least 600 completions.
Yes, it's looking pretty good for the coming year. So we'll obviously firm up the number whenever we need to.
All right, good. So despite headwinds in terms of materials, inflation, Mark is still performing strongly here. That's good news. All right, that's for noting. Julia, investment plan update.
Thank you, Chair. Just running through. So section 1 and 2 are both capital and revenue from last financial year. So it was just to update board on the figures that I provided to you at the April board, and to confirm that we are in within the 10% tolerance that we're allowed by DLUC in terms of our budget spend. Looking at 22-23. It's just to set out that obviously we have our full RDEL and we have our committed and receipts for CDEL, and we've allocated these broadly to where we've got commitments and to our key priority being Ebbsfleet Central. That covers section 3. In terms of section 4 and Annex A, I provided a broader update on each of the projects that we're moving forward on, and progressing each of the projects where we have allocated funding. I know we spoke earlier about section 5, which is actually the risks that we're dealing with, in particular with construction costs. I would suggest that those risks have not changed, depending on, I think, what's happening in the market at the moment. Each one of those risks kind of highlights itself to be one of the key risks that we're dealing with. So it's quite an unusual time in terms of trying to bring forward infrastructure and construction projects, because we're dealing with multiple layers of risk on every project at the moment, which is quite unusual, and they're live risks as we're dealing with them. In terms of health and safety, we do not have any riddles or LDCIs reported on any of the sites. Mind you, we've only got pre-construction going on our sites. In terms of the assets that we own, we continue to have low-level damage in terms of fences being broken, and padlocks being cut, and some fly tipping as well. So, and those are all dealt with, and further mitigations are reviewed. So that covers section 6.2. And just to confirm, the last thing for board actually to approve, our IOP, we reviewed the terms of reference. There were 2 changes made. The board members who subsequently left the board earlier in the year were removed from the terms of reference, and we've just updated the frequency to quarterly of IOP. And we do have the flexibility to increase IOP depending on the projects that we have coming forward. So if we have a need to have IOP earlier, we do that, and we do flex it according to the needs that we have. So that was really for the item to approve, and the terms of reference are detailed in Annex B.
Great, thank you, Julia. Can I, just on the IIP membership,
Yes.
we did have 3 board members.
We had 4.
We had 4, did we?
Yes, we had David, Bob, and Louise, and Nick. So obviously those 3 board members have left.
Okay.
So we just have Nick at the moment.
So when we bring our new board members on, how would we can we change the membership from time to time? And there's,
Yeah, I think
So-
that's at your discretion, Chair.
so, or can we, in these terms of reference, can we say up to 3 non-executive directors?
That would make sense.
Yeah, can we do that?
Yeah.
I know you got rid of everything, but you know, may get some more in from you.
Very well away.
None of Nick's work. So perhaps if we could say, you know, up to 3.
Yeah.
Obviously with Nick. That'd be good. All right.
Next question, sorry.
Yes, of course, John.
On a page on the table, waste management, we were discussing it with Kent Council. Are you talking about the ultimate collection point and using the vacuum system and cut out boroughs of Dartford and Gresham, which is fine?
No, this is.
Or are you engaging with the boroughs and districts in their collection
So,
systems? We run different systems.
yeah, so what we're doing is we were asked to work with Kent to assist them to look at the waste transfer facility. So this is not about how you're collecting it, it's where you're taking it to. So it's about the fact that Pepper Hill is over capacity and we need to make sure that we've got capacity to deal with whatever the Garden City generates from it itself at the moment. So that's what it's about. So, and the way it works, John, is that the Kent officers are responsible for engaging with the local boroughs like yourself and Jeremy. So, because to be honest, they're the waste authority from that point of view, so it's better that they engage.
They are from the point of when it's all in one place.
Yes, that's it. So that's what we're
Not how it
looking at
gets
with
there.
them. Yeah. So, because even if you have a vacuum system, it's got to go somewhere. So that's what we're looking at.
All right. Great. Thank you. In 3.3, forecast spend, that's as at our current spend review settlement for seeding,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
Though this may be amended
Yes.
as and when there's
Yeah.
further.
That's what we've got approved at the moment,
Yeah.
and that's the broad categories that
We're
we're
noting, I guess we should minute that we're noting that
Yeah.
specifically. Okay. All right, good. There's the decision there, which is the adoption subject to that one change of the IIP terms of reference. So I'm assuming everyone's happy with that. Thank you. Thank you, Julia. That means we then move on to the finance and operations report. Gerard.
Thank you, Chair. The paper sets out section 2, the revenue RDEL budget that we are going to be working to this year. The department have confirmed the grant allocation that we'll be receiving this year, and also that we can retain and utilise receipts. We generate receipts from renting out our sites and also from planning fee income. So the budget that we're working to makes some assumptions on both of those amounts. The details are set out at Annex A, and then the budget makes some various assumptions around staffing numbers and non-pay costs. I would just highlight the point at 2.5 that Annex A does exclude the money that we've agreed with the department that could be carried over relating to the London Resort DCO examination process. So that's not shown on Annex A. Section 3 just highlights the capital budget, which Julia's just explained. And section 4 details what's going on with staffing structure and recruitment. We've got a couple of posts out at the moment, but there are some other recruitments planned over the next coming months.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much for that, Gerard. Any comments? Yes, Daniel.
Could I raise a point? Obviously, every organisation like ours has to work hard to persuade sponsoring departments to cough up the money that we need. And one of the ways of persuading them is to demonstrate regular efficiency. Organisations I've worked with in the past in the public sector have often taken the approach of effectively challenging management to come forward each year with budget proposals that take 3% of operational spending out, 3% every year out of the system. 3 is a number, it could be different. Could be 4, could be 5, to start with. And then to come forward with proposals of doing that, which are often quite gritty proposals, together with some red, amber, green assessment of their impact, public impact, operational impact, and so on. And then it's very much for the board to decide, do we want to take these? That's the decision of the board. but it keeps officers on their toes about constantly looking for efficiencies in what they do, and it squeezes money out of the system. And we can redeploy that money on other things that we might want to do as changes of ambitions and priorities. The advantage of this, in my experience, has been that it's a great deal better than what sometimes has to happen, where you have to do sudden budget cuts. And very often when you take money out in one big slug, it just creeps back in later on. Whereas this sort of just squeezes things gently over a period. And it always has officers thinking, well, how am I going to do, even now, 12 months ahead, I'm thinking, how will I be doing this more efficiently in 12 months' time? How do I take a bit of expenditure out of it? And I just wondered if we set a program like that in hand here, whether it would pay dividends, both in terms of our own efficiency and flexibility, but also in showing the department that we took efficiency very, very seriously.
Board? Nick?
So absolutely, I understand that. And we would always try to, how can we build more next year, deliver more with the same resource. It is a fundamental management discipline, and if you're in the supermarket, they will always challenge you to increase your productivity and come up with saving ideas so that each department has a target and a KPI to improve efficiency, and that their targets for the year are to do X in terms of efficiency. So,
Now, any thoughts?
tough old thing after COVID.
Well, in principle, yes, it's good discipline because it's an exercise to be gone through, and it means that every time one's promoting expenditure, whether just rolling it forward from one year to another, when you think about it. So I'm in favour of that because we're looking at it in terms, we've set the budget, we've discussed it, but we've had been 21, 22 to the current budget, 22, 23, we've got a very substantial increase because of the different functions, very substantial increase in staff costs.
Yeah, no, this isn't.
No, this is
cutting the overall budget,
no.
Because as you take on more functions, your budget is going to increase. It's doing what you can do a little bit more efficiently every year brings real benefits over time. In my experience.
Yes, what I was going to go on to say was that, so when we look, we've got that increase because we're changing functions. So step one is to say, what are if you're going to look at your 3%, you've got to look at the functions. But what we're saying is, can we perform the functions that we think are appropriate, but more efficiently than each year?
Yes. So this is, in a sense, preparatory for next year's budget. Next year, you come forward with the same functions, but we could do the same functions for 97% of the cost. And my guess is, in the first year, that'd be pretty painless for officers. They'll find things that they can do. It gets harder as the years go on. Then it's for the board to say, that's too hard. We don't need to do that. We're not going to, but we want to illustrate it to us, what it would look like if you were doing that. And then we can make a decision about whether each of those lines we want to accept them or not accept them. I was once presented with cutting the tea trolley as an option. I won't tell you which organisation.
Not for the members. It's terrible.
No, for the
must have caused a riot.
There was no tea trolley for members. This was at TFL, and literally the tea trolley was put up with, and it had red, amber, green. I had two red, amber, green columns, and this came up red in both columns. But I just laughed at them, and they cut the tea trolley. And there's no tea trolley at TFL. Yes, and so on. So some of them are actually quite easy. to do, and some of them are more difficult. Whether you count tea trolleys easy or difficult depends on how you look at it. I found it easier.
I mean, I think it's.
We don't have a tea trolley here.
We don't.
What are your,
No,
what are your views on this?
it's only a light-hearted example.
I mean, it's a good discipline, isn't it?
Okay.
What I would say to the board is that we effectively, as an executive, we've been involved in that discipline for the last, I mean, how many years have we had a flat Ardale settlement now? Last 3 years probably, and we've got for the next 3 years a flat Ardale settlement. So in real terms, we're already having to find efficiencies in order to stay with that flat settlement. And we have been doing that. So, for example, one of the ways is to use consultancy less and direct staff more. We're looking to do that now. We've recruited some procurement, direct staff, savings there. So I think it's a good discipline, yeah, for the board to be challenging us on those.
Good. Well, can we have a look at some ideas of 5%? Yeah, I suggest 5%. Cycle of this. In year, let's just see what that throws up.
Yeah.
These are not things that we can take necessarily, but we'd like to see where it leads.
As I say, it sort of cuts in as we prepare for next year's budgeting, but it ties into, in a way, what we get. Well, we know our CDL settlement. It's going to be happening next year's budget. It's a slow process, but it cooks beautifully over time.
So we now know our Ardale settlement for the next 3 years, which is the period spent on duty. It's flat cash, so effectively, in real terms, we've got to find efficiencies because if we, there will be pressure on pay settlements, well, we've got to accommodate whatever the board decided anyway. So we've got to be finding efficiencies in the way we do things.
Could I just mention our income? Because at the moment we have quite a significant amount of income which is boosting our budget availability. That's predominantly due to a very nice tenant we have down on the international car park. That will disappear at some point, and a significant amount of our income will drop at that point. Our plans for regenerating the area will happen, but our income will reduce, so our budget availability will drop significantly at that point.
It's good preparation for it.
Good. All right. So you'll.
And just to say, I would look at total expenditure, so that would include not just the Ardale, but also the income.
Yeah,
so total expenditure.
Yeah. Sorry, just to be clear, Daniel's sort of hinting to this as a discipline for next year. Are you wanting us to come forward with some proposals for this year?
Well, this year.
Oh,
right. Okay. I'll leave that to I'm the gentler one.
Tea and biscuits have gone then.
But we might choose to have.
We're back to coffee bags, Daniel.
Keep the coffee bags very expensive compared to a jar of Nescafe.
This would be because obviously we've been allocated an amount of in the board and not placing hands in that.
Who knows? We may be asking for some of them.
Well, we may be, which we have to do that.
Yeah.
So this would be to reallocate resources within whatever.
Let's discuss it. We're not asking you to cut anything.
Just
we're asking
show
you
some
to
options.
illustrate how you would cut something, and in that context, we can think about what it might be used for. We're not asking for a paper rather than action in the first stage. We might, having looked at the options, then say, yes, we're happy for you to make those efficiency, some of those efficiency savings, others that you put into frighten us.
They'll all be frightening.
They're always frightening. Yeah.
But we're not easily frightened. Seen all before.
Mostly they're deliverable as well. So, okay, great. Right. So perhaps in the next finance update. Then. Thank you. Bill, thanks for that. All right. I think that brings us towards the end of today's public business. We, as always, received some excellent public questions, which, if you're going onto our website, keep them coming. I always find it very refreshing to see the questions that are being asked. People are holding us to account. Well done. So I think that then brings us to the end of the recording. Thank you for joining us here at Ebbsfleet Development Corporation.